And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, can this fine wine I'm drinking double as a medical utensil sterilizer? And can my grandmother please stop watching One American News at the assisted living facility and also stop being so racist? And now, the podcast host who would never contribute to a teenager's delinquency even when the parent demands it, Pete Dominic.
That's right, Pico. I love dropping little nuggets from my life into the show and having Pete Co. turn them into intros. You are the best. You've done it again, sir. But seriously, why is your grandma so racist? Man, let's get this lady on the show. Awesome show for you today. I've got both Maura Quint and Professor Eric Segall joining me. Maura joins me every Monday. Apparently, a lot of you want Eric Segall to join me every week as well. But I had a great conversation with both of them. Very excited to share that with you. Also, got the news dump coming up. Lots to discuss in the news. Hope you had a good weekend. I did. I went up and hung out with my pals from high school, for my buddies, one of which is playing in his band in Saratoga. And we had an awesome time hanging out. Lots of fun. My ankle is still pretty tender. I might need to get this checked out. But at least I have all my equipment. So this week on the show, very excited. I'm going to have a lot of great interviews, guests on the program. Looking forward to another great week here on Stand Up. Can't do it without your support. Go to standupwithpete.com right now to subscribe. It's the beginning of another month here with you. It's October 2021. I turned 46 this month. I love October. I love Halloween. I love autumn. I don't know how you feel about it, but we can talk about that and many other things on the Hangout Thursday night or anytime on the Discord platform that stand-up community members are always invited to join in with. Ava's got her license, and that's pretty crazy. Anybody that wants to give you advice on how you're coping with your kid or how you did when your kid first got their license, always open to your advice there. Love talking parenting, and one issue did come up that I wanted to share with you, which is I've always talked about this. I'm an anti-helicopter parent. I think it's very important to not scare your kids with irrational fears and create unnecessary anxieties. Life is going to have plenty to worry about without telling them that they shouldn't go in the woods or visit New York City or go on a plane, which I think are irrational concerns. Ava and 5 of her 16-year-old friends are going to take the Metro North into New York City for the afternoon next week, and one parent is concerned about them riding around on the subway, and I just think it's wild, and I have this difference of opinion with this parent, and I always love talking about that stuff with you as well. But my daughters, I talk about that with Maura, so I'll just leave it there, have a conversation with her about that coming up, but I always want to talk about that with you as well. All right, let's get to all of the news that happened over the weekend. It's time for The Last 24. Okay, folks, I scan all of the newspapers, the magazines, the blogs, the TV shows. I do it all so you don't have to. Not really. You should do your homework. But I pick these stories, I pick these clips, I play them for you, give a little thought, a little take, a little analysis, a little joke maybe, and then we just get to rapid-fire headlines. But a lot happening over the weekend, of course. Always a lot to talk about on a Monday in America. And I'll get to the clips in just a moment here. But of course, major protests over the weekend across the country, but thousands of protesters marched and hundreds of rallies across the United States Saturday demonstrating against a new... Did you hear my voice just crack? Oh, I'm leaving it in there. I'm going to grab that in a minute and keep replaying it. Anyway, they were demonstrating against a new Texas law that bans most abortions after 6 weeks, and warning that Roe v. Wade is under threat from the Supreme Court. And very, very important rallies over the weekend. I talked about that with Maura as well. Eric Segall and his family were at the protest, I believe it was in Atlanta, and he shared a sign. I talk about that with him today as well, but he shared a sign from one of the protests. He said it was his favorite that read, "As a woman, I hope one day I have as many rights as a gun." Good sign. I like it. Now, let's just check back in with that voice crack. Here it is. Yeah, that one really snuck up on me. You don't really hear the voice crack as much these days. And not with the word against. I love to make fun of me. Okay, so the other huge major top story really has to be the U.S. pandemic death toll surpassing 700,000, ladies and gentlemen. The Associated Press noted that the last 100,000 deaths came during a time period when vaccines were available to all Americans over the age of 12, which is a reality that's leaving a lot of doctors, experts, public health officials pretty upset because so many of the fatalities were likely preventable. The positive news is that the latest nationwide wave of infections appears to be burning out, and hospitals and deaths are forecast to fall for the first time in months. Meanwhile, Reuters news tally found that the global death toll from COVID-19 is now more than 5 million. The numbers are probably higher, though the fatality rate has been slowing in recent weeks. I've got some sound for you coming up on that in a minute here. Facebook has a whistleblower problem, which I'm loving. Watched last night's 60 Minutes. I don't think I have any sound on that, but definitely watch it. I'll get into it in the next days, I'm sure. But I just do have to mention one more story before I get to the COVID news and congressional negotiations update. But the biggest ever leak has exposed the rich and the famous. It's called the Pandora Papers, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to hear and read a lot about it. I'm sure I'll do segments with reporters and experts dedicated to it. Here's the headline at The Guardian. Pandora Papers' biggest ever leak of offshore data exposes financial secrets of rich and powerful. Millions of documents reveal offshore deals and assets of more than 100 billionaires, 30 world leaders, and 300 public officials. And I get into that with Maura as well, and I'll talk more about that in the days and weeks to come. But let's now get to the audio I've got for you and start with COVID news, folks. Hit it, Pete.
COVID news.
All right, we got plenty of conversations and discussions and debates and new laws regarding mandates. You got the pill that can help treat people once they've gotten COVID. And the new CDC recommendations for the upcoming holiday season, they were released this weekend, and they recommend, first of all, we can still say Christmas, even though COVID. You can still wish people Merry Christmas. That hasn't, the war, and that has not begun because it was never a thing. But the CDC released its recommendations for celebrations, and they are urging people to avoid large indoor gatherings again this year, and instead want people to celebrate only with members of a household. Other options include a virtual celebration or a meeting outdoors, so long as everyone stands at least 6 feet apart, which is why it's probably a good time for me to plug how good I am at being hired to come into your office work party virtually. Last year, I did one up in British Columbia and a couple of others here more locally. But I'm great for your virtual party. I will come in and I'll make fun of everybody you work with or your family. It'll be really great. So please hire me for that. People do go to events, though. The CDC recommended they be vaccinated against COVID-19. And if in communities with high rates of transmission, that they wear masks, even outdoors. If celebrating indoors, doors and windows should be open. That's the guidance for your celebrations. Also, the CDC says, invite me to your virtual party. Thanks, CDC. All right, let's start with some sound with CBS Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan had Dr. Fauci, who was on a couple shows, Sunday shows, and she asked him about California's announcement to mandate vaccines to see what he thought.
We've seen such an uptick in infections among kids and low uptake of the vaccine in that 12 to 17 range. California just mandated it as of January is the estimate. Do you think other states should follow suit?
Well, I agree with what Governor Newsom did in California. I mean, I'm not going to getting into the local issues, only to talk about general principles, that people need to realize that having a vaccine requirement for schools is not a new novel thing that is very peculiar or specific to COVID-19. We've been doing this for decades. My own children could not have gone to school if they had not gotten vaccinated with the measles, mumps, and rubella. So when we see pushback on that, it's as if this never happened before. It's actually ongoing with other vaccines. So let's do it with a virus that's very, very serious. And as you just mentioned with the numbers, Margaret, has caused an unprecedented number of deaths and infections in this country.
All right, so there you go. There's Dr. Fauci on the California mandates. Well, let's head over to West Virginia because Margaret Brennan also had on the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice. And listen to this guy. I mean, he's got this folksy thing. He's always begging people every day with his stupid dog, telling them, you got to go get vaccinated every day. But he needs mandates too. And Margaret Brennan really turns the screws on him. And I hate to be that guy who's like, that sounded a little, I think you wouldn't have said it that way to a man, but listen to how this starts. And I just kind of feel like he wouldn't have said this to like your Chuck Todd or whoever else. Maybe he would have. It's not that big of a deal. Margaret Brennan handled herself just fine. And I love the way that she was not taking his bullshit folksy attitude about not saving people's lives with mandates.
You yourself at your press conference this week encouraged parents to vaccinate their children. California's governor's mandating kids 12 to 17 get a vaccine to go into the schoolroom after around January. Are you going to mandate it for school kids as well?
No chance.
Why?
No chance.
Why? You mandate as governor, you mandate, we looked, measles, mumps, rubella, tetanus, polio, other vaccines. Why won't you put COVID on that list?
Now, Margaret, you don't have to come in so hot. You guys asked me to come, But, Margaret, the bottom line of the whole thing is just this. I truly believe that the mandates only divide us and only divide us more. From the standpoint of mandates, I don't believe in imposing upon our freedoms over and over and over. And I've said that over. I don't know how many times I got to say it. Mm-hmm. But from the standpoint of our children, I'm going to still encourage in every way, because I truly believe that the more people that we get vaccinated, the less people will die. But at the same time, we still got to stand up for who we are. For crying out loud, we're Americans.
I know this has become a big issue for the Republican Party, which you are a part of, in terms of framing this as a freedom of choice. But for small children, you mandate that their parents get them those immunizations so that they are safe in the classroom. They don't have freedoms as children to choose whether or not to get polio or not. We protect them against that. Why don't you want to protect those children by mandating it?
Margaret, to think that I don't want to protect the children is ridiculous. I mean, we all want to protect our children, but parents have decisions to make in this situation too. Just like the local officials have decisions to make. For crying out loud, that's who should be making these decisions, is the parents. And
well,
from the
you'd
standpoint
make those
of the
decisions
federal government,
as a governor, actually.
Yes, good job, Margaret Brennan, the whole time. Not letting them get away with any of that bullshit folksy. I'm just me and my dog. We just want you to get vaccinated. I'm not going to tell people what to do. I mean, people know what to do. No, they don't. That's what you're there for, you dummy. That's what the government is supposed to do to a certain extent. Not everything, but that's what public health experts are advising governors to do. That's what they're there for. All right, and now here is one more piece of commentary analysis on the politics of the mandates, and this is coming from a health policy guy, former FDA chief Scott Gottlieb, not a political analyst, and I don't love his political analysis when he rarely does traffic in it. He tries to stay, I think, out of it, but I did think this is an important question answer. Again, CBS Face the Nation. Here's Scott Gottlieb with Margaret Brennan.
You've been concerned about politicization of vaccines. Aren't we already there?
We are there. Look, these are not just individual choices. These are collective decisions. And we've always looked at vaccination as a collective decision. That's why we have a childhood immunization schedule, because your behavior with respect to your choice around vaccination affects your community. That's why I think the right locus of decision-making around these mandates is as local a level as possible. So to the extent that governors and mayors can do this, I think that's going to depoliticize these kinds of decisions. It's when the federal government steps in that this becomes more of a political issue. I do worry about the consequences of the moment we're in, the fact that now vaccination is something that's dividing us culturally and politically, because I think that's going to have broader implications than just around COVID. I worry that going forward, we're going to see vaccination rates decline as this becomes more of a political football, and we see people, literally governors, running against vaccine and vaccine mandates in the next presidential cycle. That's going to be deleterious to the public health generally, if that's what comes out of this episode we're in. Yeah, well, that's exactly what's coming out of this episode that we are in. But let's get to one more aspect of COVID news, and that is this new pill from Merck. Here is Fauci with ABC News' John Carl on that, because if I get I don't have to get vaccinated anymore if there's a pill, right? People are asking.
Oh, absolutely not. That's such a false narrative. If someone says, well, now you have a drug.
Remember, the easiest way to stay out of the hospital and not die is don't get infected.
Don't get sick in the first place.
You have a drug that's very good, but
yeah.
Exactly. I mean, this idea about we have a drug, don't get vaccinated, just doesn't make any sense.
And John Carl also asked Dr. Fauci where we're at. Are we finally turning the corner on the pandemic?
All right, last question, Dr. Fauci. There has been some good news. It looks like infections are down dramatically over the last couple of weeks. Deaths are still on the rise. That's obviously a lagging indicator. Is it possible that we are finally beginning to turn the corner on this pandemic?
We certainly are turning the corner on this particular surge, John. But we have experience over now close to 20 months of surges that go up and then come down and then go back up again. The way to keep it down, to make that turnaround continue to go down, is to do what we mentioned. Get people vaccinated. When you have 70 million people in the country who are eligible to be vaccinated, who are not yet vaccinated, that's the danger zone right there. So it's within our capability to make sure that that turnaround that we're seeing, that very favorable and optimistic turnaround, continues to go down and doesn't do what we've seen multiple times before, where it goes down and then it comes back up. We can do that merely by getting vaccinated.
All right, well, that is your COVID news, and now it's time to get to the other big story that unfolded over the weekend when Friday night there was not a vote on the infrastructure and more sweeping reconciliation bill. It can be kind of confusing. I think I understand it. Oh, okay. But President Biden Friday told congressional Democrats during a closed-door meeting for the first time that it's just reality that the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure bill and the larger, more sweeping reconciliation bill must remain tied together. He urged patience, saying that they will get it done, whether it takes a matter of days or weeks. And Nancy Pelosi set a new date to vote on it for October 31st, apparently. But a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis about the infighting between progressives and moderates or conservatives, however you decide to call them. But I've got sound for you from Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who has led the Progressive Caucus on this. And they stayed together. My just quick analysis of this is that the vast majority of Americans support the parts. As always, when explained what's in this bill, just like the Affordable Care Act, it overwhelmingly, Americans love it, think it's a great thing, think it'll make our lives better and more secure and create a lot more opportunity, less poverty, more prosperity, better infrastructure, and lead us into a future economy, as well as do whatever is possible to slow the rate of climate change. But that's not how it's being framed by many in the media, that it is somehow there are two sides to this in the Democratic caucus. It's really not. It's over the overwhelming membership of the House, but save for a few, and all of the Democrats in the Senate, but Manchin and Sinema. Of course, nobody really seems to talk about the fact that Republicans are just watching everything burn down and doing nothing to improve lives of Americans. But that's beside the point. Let's focus on the progressives and what they are saying. But before I play Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Congresswoman Jayapal, let me just play this controversial clip that took place on ABC's This Week with the scoundrel that is Chris Christie. This one gets you pretty fired up. It's pretty upsetting. And it's just bullshit. I mean, he tried to make the argument that Biden, this isn't Biden's. This Build Back Better is Joe Biden's signature legislation. Christie tries to say that Biden ran as a moderate and beat the progressives, which is, true. It is true. He beat Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. But he ran on this legislative agenda, which wasn't Medicare for all. That's not in this. Anyway, here it is.
Well, look, it doesn't matter. When, I had a political science professor in college who told me when your adversary is in the midst of committing suicide, there's no reason to commit murder. The result is the same. And that's what's happening with Democrats right now. It's the death of 2020 Joe Biden. When he went to the Hill, 2020 Joe Biden is now officially dead and buried. The guy who ran against the progressives, ran against Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, ran to be a uniter in this country, ran saying he was going to force compromise. And he went up to Capitol Hill and he capitulated to the progressives, the liberals in his party. And why should we be surprised? He couldn't stand up to the Taliban. How could we expect him to stand up to AOC?
Okay, so look, Don.
Yeah, John Carl didn't even know what to do with that. It was just so just so stupid. It's so hacky and not fun. And he's still one of the most serious commentators on the right. And yet he's extreme and ridiculous, but yet serious and respected because everybody else thinks the moon is made of cheese and Democrats eat babies. And, well, let's not talk about what Chris Christie eats because that's not fair. But let's move on to the progressives. First, let's get to Bernie Sanders, of course, the senator from Vermont, but also the very powerful chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. I think this is from Meet the Press. Yeah, that's right. It's Senator Sanders not really loving Chuck Todd's framing and nonsense.
What is your preference when you're writing this bill? Look, I know what your initial preference was. You believe 3.5 trillion is the compromise, that you started at 6 trillion. But whatever the number ends up being agreed upon, do you believe in these programs? Because there's a large wish list and a set of needs the country has, but you might not be able to do all of them fully funded. Do you believe in trying to do as many of them as you can, and maybe that some of them are smaller programs and you'll vote on them in a couple years to extend the funding? Or do you think you got to do 3 or 4 things really well?
Chuck, this is not a wish list. Climate change and cutting carbon emissions has everything to do with whether or not we leave this planet to future generations that is healthy and is habitable. Scientists tell us we got a few years. You want more workers out in the workforce. We need to reform child care so that 1 million women can come back to work and not have to pay as a family 20 or 30% of their income for child care. You have to have skilled workforce. We can't have a skilled workforce and do the good jobs that are out there unless we train young people. That's why we want to make community colleges tuition free. So this is not a wish list. This is what the working families of this country want and what the economy needs. The real question is, the Republicans, of course, are owned by the pharmaceutical industry and the fossil fuel industry. We don't expect them to do anything. But the question now is whether the Democrats can come together, and I think that we can, to finally do what working families in this country desperately want us to do.
All right. I think he's getting actually better at messaging and communicating. I think he's doing a great job over the past couple of years on these shows. He is the senior elder statesman, and everybody used to think he's a joke. And now he is a leader in the Democratic Party, the progressive movement. But you know who else is? Of course, the future Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she was on CBS Face the Nation, breaking it down, the importance of what's in this bill, and always talking about it in, I think, a way that folks best can understand, relate, and deal with.
So I think what we're seeing here is a dynamic where progressives are trying to skin this cat 9 different ways, but moderates are not really coming to the table. I don't even want to call them moderates because there's a lot of moderates in the party that don't like being associated with some of this hardline tactics. It's a very tiny cadre of conservative Democrats. But I mean, this is the issue, is that we're saying, okay, we're going down from 6 trillion to 3 trillion. Mm-hmm. Now it's 1 trillion. And we have some of these conservatives that say, well, our line is 0 and you're lucky if you get 1. And this isn't, I want to ground this conversation because this isn't a tit for tat between personality. This is not about me and Senator Manchin. Mm-hmm. This is about families in the Bronx. This is about people who need to take a bus to drop their kid off at school, and they're not going to be able to go back to work because they don't have childcare to go back to work.
And let's listen to a little bit more between Margaret Brennan and AOC on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday.
So you have this standoff right now. How real is the risk that the Democrats end up with nothing?
You know, I know that, I believe that the entire party is committed in delivering for this country. And I know that our caucus, the House Democratic Caucus, is entirely focused on delivering for this country. But I think the question that we're having right now, and the reason why we are having this discussion right now, is because we don't want to leave communities behind. And all too often, DC politics, when we have to make a compromise, the folks that get compromised are lower income, working class families, it's healthcare, it's relief, it's communities of color. And we want to make sure that we're fighting for all of us, not just some of us.
Which is why you're using your leverage right now to hold up the other $1 trillion infrastructure bill.
And let's listen to one more very powerful woman in Congress. This is Pramila Jayapal, and she was on CNN State of the Union with Dana Bash, who kept pressing her for a number. And the Congresswoman just wasn't falling for it. And I want you to listen to this because I think it was poorly done by my friend Dana Bash. This focus on the number. It's not that it's unimportant how much it's going to cost. I think it's very important. But I'll tell you how I do it differently and why I think it's more important for the public interest to, when they hear interviews with our political leaders in this case, to have the conversation a little bit differently. Here you go.
$2.1 trillion package, a lot smaller than what you are currently at, $3.5 trillion. Are you open to $2.1 trillion?
Well, what we've said from the beginning is it's never been about the price tag. It's about what we want to deliver. The price tag comes out of that. So we understand that the 3.5 we thought was negotiated already is clearly not negotiated. We understand we have to get 50 senators on board, and we have to keep everyone in the House on board. And so we are now going back to make sure what is the way that we can get all of the critical programs that we had identified, those things I talked to you about, childcare, paid leave,
yeah,
climate.
And I'm going to get to that in a second.
Yeah, how do we get all of those things in, but perhaps for a shorter period of time, and be able to get then to the number from that. The critical thing is let's get our priorities in, and then we'll figure out what it actually costs.
And I understand that, but there is a lot of focus, and a lot of the negotiating is on that top line number. For example, is $2.1 trillion your absolute floor?
We're not thinking about the number. And the president said this to us, too. He said, don't start with the number. Start with what you're for, and that's what he's asked them for. And then let's come to the number from there. So that's how we're thinking about it.
And that makes sense. But you have been looking at this for a long time. You have been looking at the policies and what it adds up to and how you can do it. I mean, this is what your focus has been almost solely.
Yeah.
So I'm sure have looked at whether or not you can do what you want to do for $2 trillion.
Well, we don't know what the number is yet. There's no number on the table yet that is everyone has agreed to. It's not like they've come to us and said, I don't feel the need to give a number because I gave my number. It was 3.5. So if you're in a negotiation, you need to have a counteroffer before you bid against yourself.
So if we're not looking at numbers, what about 1.5, like what Senator
Well, that's not going to happen.
But
so it's going to be somewhere.
Why won't it add up to that
because
number?
That's too small to get our priorities in. So it's going to be somewhere, between 1.5 and 3.5. And I think the White House is working on that right now because remember, what we want to deliver is childcare, paid leave, climate change.
And I want to get to that, but so 1.5 is too small, but you won't say if $2 trillion is too small.
Because I don't have a definite number yet. I mean, I don't have a counteroffer. Okay. It would be like buying a house, Dana, and going in to make an offer, and then somebody says, well, what's the lowest number you would take? Why would I do that?
So the Congresswoman, I think, handled that really well with a lot of patience, but, should have maybe shifted and pivoted more towards the talking points about what is in the bill. Right now, President Biden and progressives and Democrats need to sell this bill to the American people over the next few weeks. I think that's what you're going to see them doing. But they need to tell you, they need to convince you that this is going to affect your life, and it's going to affect all of our lives. It's so important that this is such a massive change for the future of our country, and we can't succeed any other way, in my opinion. I mean, if we don't do what is in these bills, life will be far more challenging. There'll be a lot more suffering. And if we do, we'll have so much more potential, I think, for success, especially when it comes to all of the issues, the future of economics, education, healthcare, and the fight against climate. It's all so important when it comes to climate and green energy and transforming our economy. Now I'm starting to sound like one of them. But I think more importantly, Dana Bash, the journalist at CNN, who I worked with and had a pretty good relationship with, as a matter of fact, and still do, love Dana. But I just don't like the way that she handled that, or the questioning, the line of questioning. just use the arguments against the bill, the cost of it, or the Joe Manchins of the world talking about creating entitlement societies, or your Marco Rubio saying it's Marxism. Take on the arguments and let her defend them, because that is how it should be done. I mean, that's the homework. You got a million people doing the research and writing the questions for you, and her need to stick to the money to try to get some kind of headline out of the interview, in my opinion. I just thought that was a real missed opportunity for her viewers and all of us to learn more about why this bill is important from a brilliant congresswoman that she was talking to. Anyway, that's all I've got for you on the audio. And now I'd love to hear what you think about that and anything else. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. You know, I got to get the phone number set up. I got a voicemail number I've been paying for. I got to be able to put that, and then you can leave messages. You would do that, right? You'd leave a message, and then I'll use the audio on the show, and then you'll be able to have more input. Huh? Yeah. Okay. I'll get that done. Putting it down on my to-do list right now. Let's get now, though, to the news dump. Another news dump jingle from Pete Co. And another jingle, by the way, inspired by real-life events. This is the guy who put the alligator in the garbage can, I believe.
Wrangling suburban gator will leave a bloody stump. We shit-canned it in time for today's news dump.
Yeah, there you go. So good. So good. You guys are the best. And if you want to write one for Pete, and he'll record it, Dan McDonald and others have done that many times. So if you got a good idea for a news dump, go for it. Send it over to Pete Co, B-O, on Twitter, by the way. All right, so where do I want to start with you? Let's start with the news about Facebook. An internal memo has revealed that Facebook is bracing for new accusations from a whistleblower whose identity has not been publicly disclosed after sharing thousands of pages of company documents with the Wall Street Journal. Well, I think, that woman appeared on 60 Minutes last night, and I haven't watched it yet, but I am going to as soon as I'm done with this. It looks really fascinating. Hundreds have fled from a fire on an island off of Honduras. Hundreds of residents were forced to flee for safety after a large fire destroyed or damaged dozens of houses and businesses on the Honduran island of Quanaja on Saturday. The Major League Baseball season finale has begun, and I watched baseball with my dad, which was special. We watched the Yankees win, and it was really exciting to watch. And I don't really watch baseball much, but when my dad wants me to watch anything with him, I'm down. And so they were there over the weekend. Also, week 4 of the NFL happened. If you care about that, I know a lot of listeners love football, and then you knew that, so I don't know why I'm telling you. And finally, Saturday Night Live kicked off this weekend as well. I saw some clips that looked pretty good. Usually don't include them here on the show, but I liked it. I'm liking it so far, but I'm easy to please when it comes to comedy, believe it or not. The movie Venom, the Sony Pictures Marvel sequel, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, blew away expectations this weekend with a $90 million debut, making it easily the best opening of the pandemic, according to studio estimates. So that is your entertainment box office news, I guess. The Powerball jackpot has swelled as winnerless streak has continued. There's been no winner for 40 consecutive drawings. I think that, you know what that means. Time for old Pete to get himself a lotto ticket. I think that's it. I'm going to start fantasizing about what I would do with $480 million. My Lord. Powerball played in 45 states plus Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is the most important story, I think, to follow, probably undercover, but I'm just reading about it Sunday night. Major oil spill closes California's Huntington Beach. An estimated 126,000 gallons of oil has leaked from an offshore facility, and apparently it's getting worse and worse. I don't know how big a deal this is. I'm going to be watching this one very closely, but massive oil spill off Southern California coast, and that's going to get a lot of attention from rich environmentalists with huge platforms. An environmental catastrophe, dead birds, fish washing on the beaches. Oh, the more I'm looking into this, the worse it gets. All right, let me move on to another terrible story. A statue in New York City honoring George Floyd, Union Square, has been vandalized again. Apparently, it's happened before. According to police, video showed an unidentified man on a skateboard throwing paint on the statue at 10 a.m., then fleeing. Nearby statues of the late Congressman John Lewis and Breonna Taylor of Louisville, Kentucky, woman who was shot and killed by police, apparently were not touched. I didn't even know those statues were in Union Square in New York City. I'll have to tell my daughters to visit that area when they go in alone. A U.S. raising concern as China is flying warplanes south of Taiwan. The Chinese military flew 16 warplanes over waters south of Taiwan on Sunday as the United States expressing concern about what it calls China's provocative military action near the self-governing island that China still claims as their own. And lastly, over the weekend, a Texas judge found asshole and InfoWars host, probably the most dangerous man in America, Alex Jones, liable for damages in 3 defamation lawsuits related to his claims that the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a hoax. This is very good news. Judge in Austin, which is the home of InfoWars, entered a default judgment against Jones and other defendants for what she called their flagrant bad faith and callous disregard of court orders to turn over documents to the parents' lawyers. The rulings were issued on Monday, released on Thursday. Technically, it didn't happen over the weekend, but I really had to mention that story. I'm going to be reading and following that one as close as I can. Maybe I even interview somebody who's covering it or one of the lawyers. All right, well, that's it for the news dump. That's it for the news. Let's get to my first guest. It is the great Maura Quint. She is a writer and an activist, and now she's the campaign director at Americans for Tax Fairness. You should follow her on Twitter at Behind Your Back, where she's awesome and prolific. We talk parenting, we talk taxes and politics and breakfast for dinner. Always a great conversation with Maura, which is why she gets her own jingle from Pete Co.
When sunrise gives you a side ache, it's Maura Mondays.
There you are. Hi, Maura. Welcome. Thank you.
Hi, Pete. How's it going?
It is the beginning of another week, which means we've got you to help us get started, maybe look back on the week, but it's going okay. I have some personal things I'd like to discuss with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm here for that. You're going to pay me extra for therapy, right?
Well, I feel like you'll get something out of it, too.
Oh, I see. So now your therapy is my therapy? That's how this is going to work? It's very convenient,
yes,
Pete.
Well, yes and no. I feel like it's a parenting thing, so it's not specific to me. Answer to your question is yes. So here we go. How do we create and build confidence in our teenage kids? How do we do that in terms of helicopter parent versus independent choices for them? It's a conversation about that. My daughter is 16. Her friends are 16, 5 of them. They are getting together for the weekend. They're camp friends. They're all over the state. And they want to go into New York City on the train, on the Metro North from my house down the Hudson River into Grand Central and tool around the city. 5, 16-year-old young women. What do you think, Maura?
I think that's fine. I mean, when I was a teenager, our school would take us into New York occasionally. I mean, it was like 3 hours away, but we would do it on like special trips to go see a play or something. And they would just give us hours. It would just be like, just meet us back at the theater at this time. And at the time I was like, holy shit, they're just letting us go.
Right.
This is amazing. And that was before anyone had cell phones. So now that everyone can basically be tracked all the time and can be in touch with each other and like you can figure out, if you're worrying, you call them. It's fine. I have no problem with it.
And just to be more extreme, just so people know where my threshold is, I'm not saying this is true of all kids, but my 14-year-old daughter, Julia, I would let her go in alone too, specifically, especially because of the reason you mentioned, but even without the phone. But what's the concern? What are the concerns with a young single person, girl or boy, broad daylight in New York City where there's people everywhere versus a bunch of 16-year-olds with phones and maps and like, what are the concerns? And one of the concerns with one of the parents, and only one of the parents, was, I hear the subways are bad now. I'm like,
they're dirty. I mean, don't lick the subways. Does she have a child who might lick the subway? Like, that would be a concern. I don't know that kid. So,
she might be a pole licker.
You got a parent for your child.
Well, the subways, they're like, the infrastructure is like, they're not running on time. They break down too much. There's delays. I mean, by that definition, sure, they've degraded, but like and crime may have ticked up a little bit, but crime against 16-year-old people in broad daylight is, I'm just not, maybe I'm missing the story.
But I mean, I think it's fair to have some worry about your children entering the world and going out into a place. And I certainly think that it entirely depends on your kid and what your kid is comfortable with and what they know. Like if your child's never been to the city and they're maybe more of like a kid who hasn't had that kind of independence yet, or has more nerves, or just makes bad decisions. Like you just might have a kid who makes bad decisions in general. And so that might not be the sort of thing you want to let them do. But I can certainly see plenty of parents who might, who feel comfortable giving their kids that kind of space and ability to do that sort of thing. But I mean, obviously it's very individual, but I tend to be more towards the like, you're going to have to let them experience things. That's how they're going to learn. You have to give them the space to kind of fuck up even. And that's how kids grow.
This idea that you're going to be able to solve all of their problems, you're going to be there when your kid is assaulted and you're going to take care of it and you're going to solve it. It's just so irrational and unrealistic to me, this hero complex that so many parents have. No, just do your best and send them out there.
It's also, I think, there are a lot of studies on this that I read years ago. I assume they are still relevant. I haven't read any recently, but certainly from therapists saying that there are so many like late teenage, early 20-somethings that they are treating who are dealing with tremendous amounts of anxiety because they were raised in these very helicoptery environments and they've never had that, had to figure it all out themselves. And so having it kind of like all crash on them at once is really overwhelming and terrifying and sends a lot of people into, some really heightened stress. So
yeah, that's great points, and builds a lot of problems when you can't solve problems on your own. It's really super stressful and it creates emotional issues that you have to unwind later. Like put them out there, let them figure shit out, like give them a ton of advice. I love to tell the girls, like, I love to do role playing of like scenarios. What if this happened? What if that happened? How do you react here? How would you react there? Like, I think that's a great discussion to have with your kids. Put them in hypothetical situations and tell them why this would be a good choice or bad choice, because it's not always common sense. Some of it's counterintuitive. But if you do that, if you communicate a lot with your kids and you lay out different scenarios and you try to help them, then you have to send them out. You can't then put them on a leash or a helicopter and expect to fix it for them. It won't work. It creates problems later, like you're saying, I think.
Okay, so I have to tell you, I have a friend who has two children who are now in college. Her youngest just went to college this past fall and is going to NYU. And this friend is in the NYU parenting groups and sends me like clips from these parenting groups they're amazing. They're blowing my mind. There are parents who have rented apartments near the NYU campus for the first month to be there to help their children every day of their first day at college. There is one who was organizing like a big conversation with the police chief because he was concerned about the safety of the parks. These kids are going to be walking through the parks. Are the parks being patrolled enough? I mean, like really just such an intense level of hands-on, like, oh my goodness, we have to be there. We have to figure out every single problem that these kids have, like planning out their rooms, like making runs to make sure everything's, fits perfectly. And they're just all set up. It's amazing to me. I'm pretty sure that when I went to college, like my parents drove me there, but I think they might have just kind of kicked me out on the curb. Like, I don't even remember them necessarily coming up and like helping me bring a bag. Like, I think it was like, good luck. See ya.
Yes. I mean, I feel like that's so much more about the parent and what they want and not being able to let go. But by the way, I understand that it's really hard. Ava just got her license. I hate that she just got her license because it means I don't get to have that special time in the car. It was so special to me. But to her, it means independence. She didn't need that time with me. I needed it. I can't take that because it's what I want. I can't follow her around and watch over her because it's what makes me happy or makes me feel safe. It's not about me as much as I want it to be. It's about her and her life. If you want to be a good parent, it can't be about you so much at a certain point. That's what you had, till 12 years old or whatever age they really start to get independent. And then it changes and you have to adapt with it, or else you're handicapping your kid. I can't see it any other way. I'm very stubborn on that point.
I'm sympathetic to people who feel, very, very nervous and incredibly invested. Obviously, that's like not a bad thing. And you, of course, want the best for your kids and you want to protect them. I fully understand all of that. But I agree. I do think that it becomes then about you and your needs and not necessarily your child and their needs. And that's really tricky and really difficult. But I also, it was interesting because like, I'm definitely someone who parenting was not like, some people are just like, I want to be a mom. I want to be a dad. That's the driving passion of my life. And they just want it so badly. And I never had that kind of like fire. Like having kids. Sure. It was kind of like that. Like my spouse at the time really, really wanted kids, seemed okay. Let's do it. But like, it was never, I love my kids dearly. And I try so hard to like enrich their lives every way I can. But they are not everything. Like I always make sure that there's more in my life than just them. And I really just like, to me, that was just intuitive. That was just sort of like, that's what you do. You can't just make your world about your kids. But I will say there was a point when my kids were young that I was kind of like, oh, actually, like developing my life is kind of hard. It would be so much easier to just focus on them. Like it's kind of easier to not sort of grow my hobbies and interests. It's like, that would take a lot of time and it's work and stuff. And it would just kind of be easier to fall into just being an amazing mom. And well, speaking of, that's my amazing mom who needed to call me immediately.
Well, that's hilarious. But that is such a thoughtful and nuanced and personal take that I think a lot of people just heard and felt maybe liberated by. I really appreciate what you just said a lot. Let me change gears a little bit, but still kind of a parenting thing. I won't obviously reveal too much here, but my girls are 14 and 16. They're popular with the boys. I'm not going to reveal much more than that, but I've talked with you about this privately. But you're a grown woman, and you can reveal whatever you want about your life. So, what is your advice for me and other parents of boys and girls, like teenage, in terms of sexual activity? Because I do think this might be shocking for some people, but like I had this conversation with listeners a couple weeks ago that, the conversation about birth control is super important. And I don't know enough about the health, preferences for the pill versus IUD and stuff. So I'm trying to kind of learn that. But what, the old knock is once you give them any kind of birth control, you as the parent are also giving them permission to have a ton of sex. What do you make of that old paradigm?
I mean, I don't believe in abstinence only education. It's not as though I think, well, you can footloose town them and like, they'll never know about it and it's going to be fun. Like, that's not going to happen. They're going to have sex if they want to have sex. Like, that's just how life works. Life finds a way, fucking finds a way. So I don't believe in the birth control thing or that sort of wisdom, whatever. I don't know. I can't think of words at the moment. I'm so lost in the idea of teens having sex. I'm sorry.
No, yeah. I mean, the research on it is fairly consensus on abstinence only education and the outcomes there.
No, I think it's your kids have the tools that they need to face whatever they're going to face, and sex is certainly going to come up. And so I think it's great for kids to have that. I have like a weird background. Like, I'm very open about sex. I have no problem talking about sex, except that I grew up in a household where you just never talk about sex ever. Like, no one ever said that word. If it was on TV, you change the channel. Like, it just doesn't exist. And so the idea of like parent-child conversations about sex, I know that it's really important, but I have no like personal history of it yet. And so it still kind of scares me. But I do think it's wonderful when parents can be really open and have that type of communication with their kids.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, my girls and I have a really very open conversation. Some might argue too open. I didn't ask to learn certain things, but I also feel really proud that they feel safe telling me these things and that I don't react with some kind of primitive male cave person reaction. But at the same time, again, they're in charge at a certain point. You can't just watchdog them all the time. And when you try to, you alienate yourselves from them as well. You push them away. It's a delicate balance, but I don't know. I think I'm striking a pretty good case, but this is a new frontier. Sex and birth control.
I think if your teenage daughters are comfortable speaking to you about this stuff, like that is to me telling that you have done a really good job making space for them to feel safe and to have that kind of open line of communication. In general, I think we would all be a lot better if sex were something that we could all kind of talk about really freely. I think that's super important just in terms of sexual experiences. I think one of the ways that kids would have a lot fewer problems is if they could speak honestly to one another, which is very, very hard to do when you're a teenager. It's incredibly difficult to talk about what you're comfortable with at any given moment. And, all of that it's like very embarrassing, but so I think that like when you are making it very easy for your kids to talk to you about sex, hopefully then they will also feel as empowered to talk to their partners about their experiences and what they want and what they're comfortable with. And they'll already kind of be past the idea that, oh, we don't talk about sex, or I shouldn't really say anything, or I need to like keep all of this, kind of inside.
That's I like that. I like that take as well. All right, let's get off of parenting and teen sex and on to.
God damn it! That's all I wanted to talk about. All right, what do you got?
Well, on to something way sexier, which is the budget negotiations.
Ooh, Pete, it's early.
I know.
Don't go getting me hot.
I know. I'm so sorry. I don't know how you'll focus. So, I mean, there's a lot to say here, but I feel like one conversation, I don't know how closely you've paid attention to the media coverage of the negotiations, but one thing I'm seeing, and I don't know which is true, but that there's all this infighting with Democrats, and we can label them as moderate or conservative Democrats. And obviously we're talking about Manchin and Sinema, but also some more conservative Democrats in the House. But my understanding, and I think this is super important, is that overwhelmingly the Build Back Better bill and all that is in it is wildly popular with the American people. So I wonder what your take is on the way that it's being framed in terms of, there being a real divided conversation over it versus the vast majority of Americans that are paying attention, know what's in it, like what's in it for the most part.
What? You're telling me that there is something that is incredibly popular that we're just not doing for some reason? Pete, that's shocking. I've never heard of such a thing. Right. In this country? My goodness. Yeah, it's honestly infuriating. I mean, the idea, frankly, I'm not super excited for this Monday to start because last week felt like a million weeks. And I feel like we should get a million weekends too. Like I need more time to deal with all of it. But it's incredibly frustrating. The media's coverage of it has been absolutely bash your head against a wall, infuriating. It is the Build Back Better agenda is, yes, as you said, incredibly popular. And there has been so much polling on it. And I have been in so many conversations with so many groups conducting more and more polling, very like state specific polling. Is it popular in West Virginia? Is it popular in Arizona? Like in the hopes that that will be persuasive because it is overwhelmingly popular. And it doesn't seem like that really matters. That certainly does not seem to be what's driving individuals like Manchin and Sinema and the way that they are communicating and potentially voting on this package, which.
What do you think about the argument that Manchin and others are making that you're creating a society where government gives people everything and then they don't then, I guess, work for it. They get lazy and it's, these handouts and so on, because I could fill up the next hour ranting about that. But you're going to be good, far better, I think, in just talking about this. I mean, this idea, you've heard it from Manchin, you've heard it from obviously most conservative Americans actually believe this kind of ideology that when you give something to somebody, they're not going to work for it because there's a grain of truth of that, or they know somebody that's the case. But in reality, when we're talking about what's in this bill and what you will be giving people that's being paid for, what do you think to that argument?
I mean, I think that there is something to be said for when you give people things, they stop working for it. And what we've been doing systemically is giving the wealthiest massive, massive giveaways time and time again. They don't have to worry about anything. They are able to just get a tremendous amount of entitlements. I think it's insane when we spin that around and start talking about things like SNAP benefits or housing. There's a difference between giving people something because they don't need it, which is what we've been doing with the rich over and over and over again. And they just are given these sort of golden parachutes. No matter what they do, they can't fail. There's a difference between that and giving people things that allow them to live, which is totally different. And right now, when we're looking at the specific things that are in the Build Back Better agenda, you're looking at things like childcare, which you want someone to work. They can't work if they have to take care of their children. They can't work if they can't afford to have anyone else watch their children. You can't do both at the same time. It's not possible. So you're looking at things that give people an opportunity to better their own lives. That's not an entitlement or a handout. That's not, I mean, you know, I just hate when I hear these people talk about entitlements in that way, especially when we're looking at like, they just sign off on these massive, massive military spending budgets. No problem.
Yeah, that's the point.
That's an entitlement.
I've seen people make that point over and over the past few weeks in terms of the military budget, which also, I guess, just got passed. They didn't even blink at that. They didn't. No. There was no argument that we couldn't afford it. It's just such a given. And I hate that. No, we should always have that conversation. And furthermore, defense spending does not give you nearly the bang for the buck as the social spending and healthcare. But you said we need to give folks something that allows them to live. And then you went on. But I was going to jump in and say, if you give them the thing that allows them to live, it allows them to do what conservatives are so concerned about, to work, which is what you just said. We're giving them the opportunity to work, to go to work and do all the things that conservatives think, you know, are the merits of society. Fine. I don't even necessarily agree with that bullshit, but whatever. That's the point. We're giving them the opportunity to work. If they get sick or injured, they could take time off and still go back to that job, that work, and so on and so forth. You said children's health.
So many things knock people out of the workforce. And this is actually, you know, dealing with correcting a lot of it. And I mean, you also have in here some free community college, which is another element that can keep people out of the workforce or in a world that they don't necessarily want to be because they cannot afford the education. There's a ton of provisions in here that just simply help people get by, help people get to a point in their life that they want to be at. And yes, help them work. It's absolute nonsense. And then when you start talking about how much the bill costs, which is Joe Manchin's favorite thing, it's another absolute nonsense conversation because this is, you know, whether I agree with it or not, this is what Biden has put forth. He has put forth a paid for bill, which means it doesn't cost anything. They are raising the revenue at the same time to pay for the things they want to invest in. And they're raising the revenue by simply doing a couple of little things that tax the rich. There's not even, they could do a ton more than even what they need to. It's really actually pretty easy to raise this amount of revenue by doing kind of small things that really are not going to affect any individuals in any terrible way. No one's going to suffer from these types of taxes in the slightest. They're probably not even going to notice it. In fact, they're definitely not going to notice it.
Right. I mean, I just have had it with, you know, people are so fired up with like Bill Maher over a lot of things he's been complaining about forever. And I'm not even getting into that. He's sitting here complaining about taxes on the rich now. And I'm like, I love to hear rich people complaining about the taxes that the vast majority of them still aren't going to pay taxes. And we're usually talking about companies anyway. And then they always use these charts and they get you every time. And, you know, with their dumb chart about how much of a proportion of the taxes that they are paying. And then they leave it there without any context, which drives me out of my mind.
I don't know if you saw, but today there was the big piece from Washington Post on the Pandora Papers. I don't know if you saw this one. I just
read a little bit about it. Yeah, it's a big deal, right?
Big deal. And it is all about how the wealthy across the world offshore money to avoid paying taxes. But what I just loved in it is there's this little section that's like, why aren't we seeing any of the American billionaire names in there? And basically their thing was, America's taxes are so low, no one has to offshore it. They're already not paying taxes. They don't need to hide money anywhere. It's nonsense. Or, you know, they're hiding it in these other sort of locales, you know, in a couple of cases. But fundamentally, we have made things really, really easy for billionaires. They don't even have to, you know, to do any of these sort of sketchy things because we're not asking anything of them. We let them pay. I think it was 8% was what the figure that the Biden administration put out. of how much the billionaires are paying in taxes, but that's an average. The top 10, the top 20 or so are much closer to paying zero, absolutely nothing, which is so ridiculous. And I don't really understand from even a conservative perspective how anyone can argue that that's a good thing. That's how it should be, that yes, a nurse should pay more in an effective tax rate than a billionaire should.
Yeah. I overwhelmingly, they don't. When you explain it to them, I was on, what's that asshole, former governor of Arkansas, Huckabee's Fox show. And before,
why?
It was 1,000 years ago, because I don't say no to anything. And especially those conservative, like, I like going on there and stirring it up. I would go on Fox right now if they invited me. I think probably, most of the shows, but Huckabee, I asked the whole audience there. I go, do you think that you should pay tax on the work that you do or the money that you invest, like equal amounts? And everybody agreed. They were all Huckabee conservative. They all agreed. Like, it's not controversial when you explain it to people.
It's not. Equalizing capital gains rate is pretty popular, except to politicians who, that's where their donors are getting money from, and they don't want to pay it. I'm very mad, Pete. I'm very mad.
And I'm glad. I'm not glad that you're mad, but I am glad that you're mad, because when you're mad, things get done. So your organization that you're now with, Americans for Tax Fairness, is there anything that we can do that we should know? Campaigns that you are, highlighting, or people that we should call? Because obviously I always want to support the great activism that you're doing to bring attention to exactly. This is like peak time for you right now, trying to get this done. I think Friday night you told me you were like up late just watching C-SPAN, trying to figure out how this bill is going to get passed. I'm like, happy Friday.
Yeah, no, it's been super fun all week. Well, first, I would definitely say that people should sign up at americansfortaxfairness.org so that they can get information about the actions that we're doing. And we are planning to do a couple of actions. The one thing that I would sort of shout out here right now is there is a proposal in the works out of Ron Wyden's office that is called the billionaire income tax. And right now, as we're looking at the Build Back Better agenda and the ways that we're paying for it, there's not really any particular proposals that seem to be gaining any traction that are specifically targeting billionaires, not just sort of the wealthy, but really like zeroing in, except for this Wyden proposal. And what it does is it is looking to tax the gains that billionaires make over a year on the money that they have, not just on their wealth in general, like a Warren wealth tax, but for instance, during the pandemic, billionaires gained, I don't know the figure off the top of my head, but a fuck ton of money, like $1 trillion, basically, collectively on their wealth, more than that, I think. So this would look to basically say, all right, you started this year with, let's say, 1 billion in wealth, and then because of the investments on it, the untaxed investments thus far, you gained another billion over the year. We're going to tax that billion, and we're going to tax at a capital gains rate as though you were investing that sort of money. So in the same way that, you're making money over the course of a year and you get taxed on it, this is the way that billionaires make money. They don't make it by getting a paycheck. They make it by investing their money and gaining wealth off of wealth. And so the idea is to simply tax the profit that they're getting each year. So that is a proposal that's out there that could be included, and that I think would be a really fantastic way to raise revenue. So we'll probably be doing some actions on that.
Awesome. I didn't really read too much about it. I was pretty punched out over the weekend. But did you pay any attention to the big rallies, kind of women's rights rallies in Texas and other places? You any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's women's marches and a lot of healthcare access issue. And I just honestly, I just salute everyone who was out there and taking to the streets, because those issues are so, so important right now. And it's just such an awful thing. So I am so happy that there are people who are taking up these causes and are, giving their free time to go march. Really important. It makes a difference, right? Oh, it absolutely does. These things really do matter. And it feels a lot of times like it doesn't, but it really, really does. It takes every bit of this. You would know. All right, I'll let you go. But there's one more controversial thing about you tweeted something about breakfast for dinner. You could always have it. We've gotten into these kind of divisive arguments with you before. I think it was about salads. But what do you mean breakfast
You could have breakfast for every meal, basically, I think is what you said, something like that. Where's the tweet? But what is breakfast? What are we talking? Are we talking about eggs and meat?
So there's a guy I know who was giving me shit because I basically eat eggs for lunch most days. And I just think that he is entirely in the wrong. Eggs should be consumed at will. They are an every time food. Yes, eggs, absolutely. Bacon, if that's your deal, throw it in there. Sausage, vegetarian sausage, however you want to go about it. Yes, all of these things are good any time of the day. And in fact, I think even better, really, at dinner. I think eating breakfast for dinner is preferred. Now, I know lots of people like sweet breakfast too. I have no problem with that. Go for it if that's your thing.
What?
Yeah, pancakes, waffles, whatever. That's not for me, but you know,
no,
I'm on board.
My main thing with eggs for dinner is I like to have like a wine or beer most nights, and they doesn't go with eggs.
Bloody Marys, bud. They're right there.
I don't want a Bloody Mary at dinner. It's like
why not?
I don't know. It's heavy.
It's like a salad. It's a salad. It's like a side salad with your meal.
Well, listen. I mean, I usually go to work out here in the shed from like 8 to midnight. So Bloody Mary, it's like one beer, a glass of wine. But just real quick on the eggs for lunch, are we switching them up? Is it the same style all the time? How?
I like vegetable scrambles. So whatever vegetables I have on hand, basically scrambled in. Often with egg whites because I'm trying to be healthier. So, you know, there's that possibility too. But, you know, I switch it up like crazy. There's a lot of possibilities.
I think that
I also do frittatas, you know.
Ooh, yeah. Well done. All right. I'm going to, I feel like the egg white thing, I feel like the egg yolks aren't that, they found out that it's not that bad for you anymore.
Oh, they're not. I mean, like if what you're worried about is sort of the cholesterol and fat element, but for me, it's more just like a straight calorie situation. Like it just lessens the calories. And, you know, I'm just trying to like how I look, Pete. Okay. That's all I'm trying to do.
Hey, listen,
failing all the time.
I'm not
nonstop failing.
I can't, I don't know. Face. I don't know how to help you or anybody with that other than straight up compliments. So whether they work or not, I can never understand how people that look really beautiful to me, you know, especially when I'm looking at myself, to be honest with you. Like when I look at you and me in these two boxes, I'm like, okay, listen, if I were watching this, my eyes are definitely not going to the guy who looks like he's got kids in his basement. That's all I'm saying. And I do.
I'm definitely
actually
keeping an eye on him. Like that's clearly what I am watching the whole time.
Which reminds me, those kids need to be fed. I got to go sprinkle some food over the cage.
Just throw some eggs down there.
I get him a frittata. Maura, thank you as always. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, there she goes. Maura Mondays. That is Maura Quint. You can follow her on Twitter at Behind Your Back, where she's so good. And it's always great every time when I see you folks on Twitter copying me along with her, more importantly, thanking her for joining me, maybe making a comment about our conversation. She sees them, she likes them, and she sometimes comments on them, and we love it. We definitely love it. So if you're going to spend time listening to our conversation, we always love the comments too and want you to join it. All right, so one of our other favorite guests, professor of constitutional law at Georgia State University, Eric Segall, reached out to me last week, said we got to do our annual look at the Supreme Court schedule and what's going on. And there's so much to talk about, from the shadow docket to abortion and guns and affirmative action. We covered it all in an almost 1 hour conversation we caught up on Friday. Always great. He's on Twitter at eSpinSegall. He blogs at Dorf on Law. You can hear his podcast, which is back, season 2, Supreme Myths. Find it where you find podcasts. It's linked in the show notes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Legal Eagle. It's time for Eric Segall.
Hello.
Segall.
Hello.
The Legal Eagle. I'm recording.
That's fine.
I like to come in hot with you.
It's Freaky Friday.
What does that mean?
Ted Cruz is a freak, and I'm mad at him as always. And I think he is simply a toad who's evil. And I think the debates we used to have, who would be worse, Trump or Cruz, I still think it's a very close call.
I don't think Ted Cruz could acquire the kind of cult following.
Agreed. but he would be much more he'd have much more ability behind the scenes to do dastardly things.
Why are you so mad at Ted Cruz? He seems like a fine person.
So,
I mean, why now? Like,
he just made a statement either today or yesterday in the last 24 hours. I just saw it, that the shadow docket has existed since the Constitution, and the Democrats are just whining, which is, I just tweeted, a liar's knowing lie, because he's a liar's liar. What he knows is that people like Steve Vladeck at the University of Texas, people like Steve's a liberal, Will Bode, a conservative law professor at the University of Chicago, who clerked for Justice John R. Roberts Jr., hubris face. Bode clerked for Roberts. Bode is a conservative. It is Bode who actually came up with the name, the shadow docket.
Oh.
But in any event, what Cruz knows is that when no one's complaining about the existence of a shadow docket, sometimes there are emergencies, and there are times when the highest court in the land has to do something quickly. No one's debating that. What Steve Vladeck has been saying better than anybody for the last month or so, including in front of Congress, including face-to-face with Ted Cruz, is they're abusing the shadow docket. They're abusing it. They're using it the wrong way. That's what he's saying. Cruz knows this, yet he knowingly makes a statement about how long the shadow docket has existed, which no one is denying and no one has ever denied. What Steve has compiled with data is how many times the court in recent months and last couple of years have used the shadow docket in ways that they very rarely or never used it before. So I just hate it. A lot of politicians are just stupid, and we can say they didn't know any better, or they're reading a script or whatever. Cruz, for those of listeners who don't remember this, not only did Cruz go to Harvard Law School, not only does he consider himself a constitutional lawyer, he was the Solicitor General for Texas. He has argued in front of the Supreme Court.
Right.
He is well acquainted with all the facts I just told you, yet he knowingly lies.
He's saying that because the decisions coming out of the shadow docket are favorable to him, I guess.
Most of the time, yes. Most of the time, yes.
He probably...
But this is not a part... I think Steve has done a good job. Again, Steve's a progressive, but Steve has done a good job of explaining this shouldn't be a partisan issue. The court shouldn't have issued decisions the way it's been doing it for either side, striking things down in the middle of the night and not hearing arguments and all that stuff. But the thing about Cruz is, I'll stand by this until death's door opens up for me. I'm not a violent person, Pete. You know this. I will admit I have never been in a fist fight. I had a little skirmish once at camp, but I have never had a real physical altercation with anybody.
Well,
I want to punch him in the face so badly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
just so badly.
Get in line. Okay. So
that's the beginning of all this. Yes.
We have a lot.
Can we talk about Alito?
Yeah. Let's talk about Alito now, who is also a dirty, filthy bag of rancid meat. And he is, you've always directed a lot of fire at old Scalia. You're very anti-Italian, Justice. And so now it's Alito. But could you set us up a little bit this week, because he came out and gave a speech, comments, and he criticized his critics, specifically commented on the widely respected journalist Adam Serwer piece. And yes. That made a lot of news, but...
Well, actually, I don't think he should have done it, but that one part of what Alito said, so no one's going to like me for this, but I like Adam Serwer. I follow him on Twitter. He might even follow me. I'm not sure. But we've had some exchanges on Twitter, and I think he's a great journalist. But he did get that a little bit wrong. You know me, Pete. I'm here to just say what it is.
Yeah,
and the court in that case that they're talking about, which was the Texas case, where 5 justices, not Justice Roberts, but the 5 conservatives other than Roberts, let this crazy Texas law stand that we've been talking about, for weeks, on quote procedural reasons. And in the body of that opinion, it said, we express no view on the merits, something like that. But actually the law is troubling or something like that. Serwer kind of wrote that overturned Roe versus Wade. It didn't. And he shouldn't have written it. And that was inaccurate. Now, whether a Supreme Court justice should be, responding to media reports. I don't know. But that small sliver of Alito's unctuous, supercilious, obnoxious rant yesterday, that small part of it was accurate. The rest of it was Alito acting like a complete schmuck, if a non-Jew can be a schmuck. Is that a thing? I don't know. First of all, he went after my mentor. First of all, so the person who had the most influence on me as a young law professor was a guy named Mark Tuschnet, who was a Harvard law professor. He just retired last year. He's still, kind of hanging around as emeritus, what we call those people. Mark is famous for uttering the line, law is politics all the way down, which is more complicated than people think it is. He built a whole book around that idea. He wasn't saying it's all Republicans or all Democrats. He was making a much broader statement. In any event, Alito has had a thing about Mark Tuschnet for years. And in 2016, Mark wrote a blog post called Fuck Justice Kennedy. And in that blog post, this is before Trump won, I was really mad at Mark for doing this. And I was mad at Erin Chemerinsky, my other very famous progressive friend, for doing the same thing. They both wrote pieces in June of 2016 saying when Hillary wins and Democrats control the court, we should do all these things that Democrats and liberals have wanted to do for decades, to which I responded, no, we don't, even though ones that Erin is a close friend, and Mark literally was my mentor intellectually, kind of in the early part of my career, and I love them both. We shouldn't do all those things you want them to do. We should get the court out of politics, out of these issues altogether, which is my disagreement with liberals in general. But Alito, somewhere around that time, called out Mark personally, and they did it again yesterday. I think twice. Mark hasn't written anything recently that I know of that Alito is responding to. He just hates him. And it's complicated why he hates him. I don't want to get into it. But the point is, really, Supreme Court justices should not be calling out con law scholars personally in their speeches. He also called out Steve Vladeck yesterday, who testified in front of Congress about the shadow docket. This is the same man who, and I have a blog post on this where I give all the data. The year that Masterpiece Cake Shop, remember that case, the wedding, the baker in Colorado who did not want to make a cake for a same-sex wedding. When that case was percolating and pending, Alito gave 3 speeches in 4 months, 1 to the Federalist Society and 2 to a bunch of Catholic organizations, lots of Catholics, where he said religious freedom in this country is under attack. It's never been like this before. The Obergefell same-sex marriage decision is a threat to religious liberty, on and on and on, while a case pitting people who are claiming religious freedom and non-discrimination laws against gays and lesbians was on the damn docket. And he's publicly basically saying how he's going to rule in that case, which he hasn't heard yet, but is going to hear in a few months. He should just shut the fuck up publicly for the rest of his life because he's just terrible. And by the way, and let me preface this by saying, Kagan and Sotomayor have both, I'm sorry, strike that. Ginsburg, while she was alive, and Sonia Sotomayor now, vote liberal/progressive in 99% of the cases that they hear that involve liberal or conservative positions. So when I say the next statement, I want your listeners to understand, I have criticized, and I've done this, Ginsburg and Sotomayor for being down the line party votes as a judge. Alito votes conservative every single time. There's there may be one or two exceptions out there, but he's an ideologue all the way down. And in an environment where Supreme Court justices are going out in public and saying we're not political and we're not partisan and, ideology counts, but it's really all about the law. For a guy who votes conservative 99.9% of the time, right, he should just shut up.
But just to be clear, you're reacting to his comments criticizing con law professors and other commentators.
I am criticizing the entire Supreme Court for...
Well, that's your gig.
No. What I mean by that is in the last 3 months, in the last 6 months or something, Roberts, Breyer, and 3 other ones, Sotomayor the other day a little bit, They're all talking about how non-political they are.
Mm.
If you've ever, this is the quintessential case of, I believe she protests too much, or he protests too much, whatever the Shakespeare line is. Their hypocrisy is getting worse every day because they're getting a little bit nervous and a little defensive. Why can't they just come out? Okay, this has been somewhat serious, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, mostly serious. But here's the serious part. I mean this so seriously. Why can't they just say what Justice Souter said in a Harvard speech he gave shortly after he retired?
Which was?
Look, we don't have cases challenging the president having to be 35. And we don't have cases challenging that there has to be 2 senators from every state. Our cases involve due process, equal protection, freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, establishment of religion, and then a whole bunch of criminal cases like unreasonable searches and seizures, cruel and unusual punishments, and all. He said, we can't answer those cases by looking at text and history.
Right.
And anybody who thinks we can doesn't understand what we're doing here. And he even gave a reason that you and I have not really spent a lot of time discussing over the years, because it's like reason 4, but this really bothered Souter, or at least he thought it was the strongest point. Many times we have constitutional law cases that have 2 conflicting values. So theoretically, someone who it violates their religion to participate in an economic way in a same-sex wedding, is saying, I don't want to do this for both free speech and freedom of religion reasons. And we care about free speech and we care about freedom of religion, but that runs against equal protection, and that the state is, allowed to say you have to treat gays and lesbians equally. It's a conflict of values. It's a clash of values.
Right. Well, just to be clear, the opposite of making decisions on text and precedent is what you're saying is, of course, they don't only use text and precedent. They use their own what?
Values. All things considered. And why can't they just say that? Like, why can't they just, we look at the law, we do the best we can, but our cases almost always and inevitably involve imprecise text, disputed history, and here's the kicker, precedent which we can overturn. So I just had lunch today with a Court of Appeals judge who, by the way, I mentioned this on a previous podcast with you. I won't mention his name, but he actually listened and told me about it, which was awesome. Like, I didn't know he was listening to my podcast with you, but he was. Anyway, I just had lunch with him again, unspoken judge. And, judging is hard when you have to decide among and between conflicting and important values. That's what Souter said. He said it's really hard, and we all bring different things to the table, obviously. So listen to this example. This is I can't give that example because it gives it away. But he was saying that he and his colleagues once saw a criminal procedure case very differently. They saw it one way. He saw it a different way. The way on the facts, it triggered different laws. They were both right. In other words, it was a hard case with hard facts, and they were doing the best they can, and humans are fallible, and we make mistakes, and we do the best we can, and we move on. Why can't they say that? I don't understand.
Well,
why can't they just say that?
I'm not sure why they would not get away with it. It'd be very human, and I'm not sure what do they do in other countries? What do they do in Canada and Norway and
they don't pretend. Originalism is basically not a thing in most foreign countries. And by the way, that's for constitutions much newer than ours. So most countries with constitutional courts, it's changing a little bit over time, but generally speaking, the idea of originalism is not one that they take very seriously.
Did I name countries with constitutional courts by any chance just then?
Did you name
Canada, Norway?
Well,
Japan.
Canada has a Supreme Court, but not a constitutional court. Germany is the best example. Germany has a special constitutional court. It's made up of 16 people, 16, even number, and they break off in groups of, I think, 6, or I forget exactly what it is, but not all of the judges hear all the cases. And it's a very powerful court. Not like, I don't think it's as powerful as ours, but it's a very powerful court. But they have a whole different way of looking at things. In fact, a law professor named Jamal Green at Columbia, great. I think he was on your show once back in the day. I think I had him on your show once. He's a great law professor. He just wrote a book that I'm reviewing for law review. And I don't agree with his solutions, but what he points out in the book is that in most other countries like Germany, what the justices do is they try to find middle grounds, compromises, and they have the way they view rights is differently. It's called proportionality. So they take into account. So, for example, the example he gives is abortion's a big issue in Germany, has been for a while, not like here by any means. And he attributes that a little bit to the fact that when the German Supreme Court first got involved in all this, they recognized that the fetus is life. And some people think that life deserves protection. And that's a reasonable thing to believe. And women need to have the ability to terminate pregnancies to have a full functioning in society. And both things get to be taken into account. And they come up with kind of compromise, what sounds like political solutions. That's why it's a constitutional court, because they understand that means it's a political court. That's what it means.
Right.
You know,
so we are at the beginning of a new term. You and I always talk at the beginning of a new term, and you give high and low lights about what to expect. Can we do that?
Yes, we certainly can. There are two cases the court has already decided to hear that, are country-changing cases, potentially. One is the abortion case out of Mississippi, where Mississippi banned all abortions after 15 weeks, which is well before viability. That law is, of course, completely inconsistent with the binding law of Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe. And even the Fifth Circuit, even the rogue Fifth Circuit that often ignores or distorts Supreme Court precedent, even the Fifth Circuit ruled that unconstitutional. Of course, one or two of the judges had to write saying, we have to strike this down. We don't want to. We think abortion jurisprudence is all wrong. But they did strike it down because they know that it is flatly, incontrovertibly inconsistent with Roe and Casey. The court has taken that case, and they wouldn't have taken that case if they weren't going to overturn it, Pete, because why take it? I mean, the Fifth Circuit already struck it down, so they could just leave it, there.
And they would have taken that case without Amy Coney Barrett and...
No, I'm not. Well, I can't say that. I can't. I think Robert. I can't say that. I know there's a huge segment of well-informed Supreme Court commentators and scholars who think that Roberts is going to be gun shy when it comes to overturning Roe and Casey, and I frankly think they're fucking insane. He's not going to do that.
Meaning you think he'll vote for it?
Roberts will eventually vote to overturn Roe and Casey. It may not be this year, but he will do it.
And what informs your thinking on that?
Well, with the exception of one case 2 years ago where Mississippi enacted the exact same law that the Supreme Court struck down a year earlier when 5-3, when Justice Kennedy, was on the court and he joined the liberals. Roberts dissented in that case. Roberts thinks Roe and Casey should be overturned. He just does. He's thought that for a very long time.
Okay.
His wife was president of Feminists for Life. That's not Feminists for Life. It's Feminists for Life. In other words, it's an anti-choice. It's an anti-choice group.
Yeah, great organization.
I'm pretty sure he's going to do that. If I'm wrong about that, it doesn't matter because there are 5 other justices who are likely to feel that way anyway. So
that's what I was thinking. It
doesn't really matter who's right and wrong anymore. Now, by the way, and because of that, now I could see Roberts not doing that because
he doesn't want to be the deciding vote, but he doesn't mind if it goes down.
No, here's what the conventional wisdom would be. They would say that Roberts, just like with the Affordable Care Act, is very concerned about his reputation and the court's reputation over time. Overturning Roe and Casey obviously is going to be a very big deal and criticized on rule of law grounds. Even people who think that Roe and Casey are wrong can take the position, but it's been the law of the land now for a very long time. In the 1980s, the federal government asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe 5 times. 5 times in 10 years. Supreme Court said no every single time. Then In 1989, Justice Kennedy, in dissent, voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. Then Justice Thomas replaced Marshall, so there were 5 votes to overturn Roe versus Wade, and Justice Kennedy changed his mind, and the Supreme Court basically wrote a decision saying, even if we thought Roe was wrong originally, which maybe some of us do, we're not going to overturn it because of precedent and stare decisis and blah, blah, blah. So now they have to overturn that to overturn Roe and Casey, which is you're overturning a case that said we're not going to overturn the previous case, which is pretty unprecedented in American history. So Roberts might, if he has 5 votes to get the result he wants, then I could see him joining the liberals in dissent to preserve his own personal reputation and maybe the courts. But let me just tell you, if that were to happen, the conventional wisdom will be Roberts is doing that because of concerns of institutional integrity, when in fact, that's not his leading. I think Roberts has a concern for that. That's not his number one concern. His number one priority or personality trait is hubris. I have written that in a blog post. A lot of the articles that come out in October, where with a painstaking detail, I show that what he really is a man who is full of hubris. And that's who he is. And that's what he leads with. He's quiet. He has quiet hubris, but he is hubris.
Okay, so what else?
Yeah,
what else is there to say? When is that? Isn't that being this month being
it's
heard?
December, the first week of December, and we'll know by the end of June, I guess.
Right, we'll know by the end of June for all of these, right? So
now I think if God said Eric make a prediction, or if you said Eric make a prediction, which is basically the same thing as God saying it, then I would say they will uphold the Mississippi law, which means by definition they have to alter what Casey said. Let's be clear. Casey said states can regulate abortion prior to viability, but they cannot do anything that places an undue burden in front of women prior to viability. A flat prohibition is by definition undue burden. And everybody knows that. That's not debatable. So the only way to uphold the Mississippi law is to undercut / overrule the Casey decision. Now, they may write it in a very tricky way that masquerades what they're doing, but they are going to uphold the Mississippi law, almost certainly. And that's going to be really terrible for women. In the short run, you and I have discussed, and we'll discuss it again, how in the long run that actually might not be a terrible thing for progressives, for liberals, for women. So that's the one case. And guess what? Not only do we have abortion, we have guns in your state, by the way. We have guns in your state. New York has a law that prohibits carrying a gun, concealed carry is what it's called in the trade. Unless you get a special license. To get a special license, you have to show a specific reason for fear. Not, I'm afraid of being mugged in Manhattan, but I have a stalker, or I have a restraining order, blah, blah. And they don't allow open carry in New York. You can carry a gun secretly to a pistol range or to hunt, but you basically can't stop anywhere in between. You have to go straight to the pistol range and home, or straight to the hunt. I don't know. If you're in Manhattan, I'm not sure where you're going hunting, but in any event, and the court granted cert in that case. That law was upheld by the Second Circuit. They wouldn't have taken that case unless they're going to overturn it. Here's the thing, Pete. That law, ask me what year that law came on the books.
I think it was 2008.
Yeah, 1913.
Which law?
New York's law prohibiting. 1913. Do you know who had laws prohibiting carrying guns in public? 14th century England. Do you know who had regulating weapons in public? Do you know who had laws regulating guns in public? 17th century America, 18th century America, 19th century America. At the founding, there were laws in numerous states regulating / prohibiting concealed carry of weapons. These laws have an historical pedigree that go back all the way. I am not a huge fan of historical analysis, but they are, or they say they are. Thomas, Alito. Alito came out yesterday as an originalist, which is the first time he's ever done that, by the way.
How?
It's the first time he's really self-identified.
I didn't realize. What's the quote?
He said, I'm an originalist.
He did.
Done properly. He said, I'm an originalist done properly. Of course, all the work there is properly. But speaking of Alito's hypocrisy, there was a case involving the police putting some kind of mechanical device on a car to trace the movements of the car. And the constitutional issue is that a search? And the court correctly held that it was, because obviously it is. And they did a very originalist type analysis of it. And Alito made fun of that in dissent, saying that there's nothing in 18th century America that could help us with this. There weren't tiny, this is his phrase, there weren't tiny constables hiding in the back of cars.
That's funny.
It actually was funny at the time. He was actually poking fun at Scalia. He really was. He also, in another case, asked if James Madison knew about video games. So Alito has made fun of originalism in the past.
Right. That's the point.
As of yesterday, he's now an originalist done properly.
Wow. So
done
he's
properly.
Just speaking, going back to the original point, he's being political by using that kind of.
He's a douchebag. So sorry, I shouldn't say that. But he is. So this gun case is interesting, Pete. Let's go back over it really quick. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be abridged. You know, you and I have in the past talked about a well-regulated militia part of that provision, which of course suggests the rest of it is all about a well-regulated militia, not hunting or self-defense. But I've recently done some research.
You just said abridged, isn't it? Infringed?
Cannot be infringed. Yeah, sorry. Infringed, abridged.
I feel super smart.
I'm having a senior moment. What do you think a free state means? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people. What do you think they meant by that?
I don't know. Ask one of your law students. The hell you putting me on?
No, seriously. As a matter of common English language, what do you think they meant?
State that's free, that people where people are free, non-slaves. Something slave related?
Nothing to slave. Nothing slave related.
A free
state vis-a-vis the national government. You and I have talked about this so many times, and I'm so tired of the pretense that there's a reasonable debate about this among historians, because there isn't. The point of the Second Amendment was the states, the colonies turned states, were about to turn over a tremendous amount of power to the federal government, not by today's standards, but by their standards. And they were properly very nervous about doing that, coming out of King George and England and the whole thing.
Right.
And they were afraid that this federal government would turn totalitarian. And one of the reasons they were afraid of that is they were terrified of standing armies, as opposed to, full-time armies, as opposed to militias that are called up from time to time. And they were afraid the national government would have a standing army. So, and if the national government went tyrannical and had a standing army, that was going to be a big problem. So if that's what you're worried about, and there's a long history of state militias made up of all able-bodied men who are called to service from time to time, you're going to write a provision that says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, not generic state, Georgia, South Carolina, New York, Pennsylvania, the right to keep and bear arms. It was all about arming organized state militias to repel an overbearing, potentially tyrannical national government. Just
to be clear, I certainly agree with that interpretation. We've heard you argue that interpretation before, but we don't have somebody to counter you today, which is always, it means your interpretation. But you're always so good to make the other argument. And I wonder, you're very. You often use the phrase "reasonable people can disagree." So, where do you think there's any reasonable other interpretation?
So if you just read the Second Amendment, just the text, I think reasonable people can disagree about what it means. Although I think there's a much better reading and a much poorer reading. But I do think reasonable people could possibly disagree. Reasonable people cannot disagree about the history, Pete. I'm sorry. 98% of historians agree. Historians not paid by the NRA, it probably goes up to 99%.
Let me just be clear again. Sorry. Yeah. What you're saying is reasonable people could disagree on that text if they looked at it and it wasn't attached to a country history. But for 200 years, it was interpreted one way and then that changed.
Yes.
In 1980s or late
and
70s.
It's even more diabolical than that. In the as you and I have discussed before, I do want to make one final point about that New York law in a minute. Don't let me forget to do that. In the 1970s, the NRA was pro-gun safety and pro-gun regulation because they wanted guns to be more accepted, and so they were very good, the NRA, on gun safety in the 70s. Yeah. Then you know this history. Then it was captured by the gun lobby, and everything changed. And the law professor, so there are highly technical, convoluted arguments about the 14th Amendment in 1868, how that affects how the Second Amendment should be interpreted. I don't want to get into all that. That reasonable people can disagree about. But if we're talking about the original meaning of the Second Amendment, when it was actually ratified, then no. It was about standing armies. It was about organized militias. It was about what it says in the text of that Second Amendment. And I do not accept that reasonable people can disagree about that history. Now, whether there should be gun rights in this country is a whole different story. That reasonable people can disagree about. And in fact, I think it's 41 states. It changes, 40 to 41 states have state constitutional provisions protecting gun rights. And since the federal government almost never gets involved with guns anyway, all the rights people need on their guns can be had at the state level. If you want to protect your guns, then then do it at the state level. And if Congress interferes with that, well, that's too bad. But what are the odds of that? Honestly, what are the odds of Congress in our lifetime passing meaningful gun reform?
So
zero.
Let's get back to New York.
Yeah. So that law. So I am told by people I trust, including your and my friend Clark Nelly of Cato. Clark, everyone knows this already, but I really respect him and think he's smart, even though we disagree on many, many things. I always respect his judgments, and he's a very learned person. Clark on this phone call would have, on this taping, would have said that gun law is terrible. I know what he would say because he has said this to me. It lets criminal. I mean, it doesn't do anything about criminals getting guns. Really, they'll get their guns. It keeps guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. There are already, he has some number, I forget what it is, 40,000 or something, guns in Manhattan as we speak. And he thinks it's terrible policy. To which I respond, I can't argue with you, and I won't argue with you.
Well, there are plenty of smart people that do argue with him.
Okay, but I don't. My response is not that. My response is then vote him out. Then repeal the law. Get voters to repeal that law.
Because in this other states, you can do that, and it wouldn't be something in other states to have done that.
In other words, if Clark's objection is that it's not a good law, leads to more crime, and even he's a libertarian at heart, so in his view, it takes away kind of a right that he has. If that's your view, then vote them out. But that's not for Justice Kagan or Roberts to argue about whether the gun law works or not.
Well,
it's not.
And I always liked it, just insert the conversation I had with the Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance, who talked about how effective that law was to keep crime down in New York City. I mean, you cannot carry a weapon like even certain types of knives around in New York legally. People do.
Well,
people do. So people are always going to break the law, but that doesn't mean not to have law. Sorry.
But let's go back a second on that, because you raise a great point. Okay, so I wish you could have Clark and Cyrus Vance debate that on your show. I think Clark would win that argument. But leaving that aside, doesn't matter. Here's the thing. Manhattan is an island, 3 by 5 miles? I don't know what it is. 4 by 6 miles? I mean, I don't know what the square mileage is. It's very small. There used to be 12 million people. I don't know how many million people there are now. And the 5 boroughs, and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's all.
Is it reasonable for a legislature to say, let's just take Manhattan itself, in a densely populated urban area like this, we just don't want people carrying guns?
Yes, that's the point.
Of course it is.
It's different if you're on a ranch.
Right. Well, what I always come back to on the Second Amendment, what I always come back to is there is no other constitutional law issue of which I'm aware that is more local. Abortion is abortion in Montana and abortion in Atlanta. It's the same act, the same thing. There aren't any differences other than women can't get them in Montana and they can get them in Atlanta. But I mean, the actual act is the same. The balance between gun safety and gun rights, if you assume there are gun rights, that balance is so different in Billings, Montana, than it is in Billings, New York, or Atlanta, or Savannah, or Los Angeles, or rural Washington. It's just so different. Why would anyone think it's a good idea to have national rules about this? I mean, that's just so dumb. It's just so dumb. What works in Manhattan may not work in Savannah. I mean, come on, people. It's not that hard.
Do we need...
And by the way, that's how it worked until 2008.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the most important point. That's the way the world was. That's the way America was until 2008 with the Heller case.
Yes.
So
that's two cases.
Yep.
Guns and abortion.
Guns and abortion.
And if we have time, there was a big affirmative action case out of Harvard that they're thinking, they haven't granted certiorari yet, but they are thinking about it. I'm sure they want to, but I'm not sure that they can do guns, abortion, and affirmative action in the same year. Like, that feels like, even for them, that would be a lot. It's a very interesting case, though.
So they haven't taken that up yet.
No, but it's on that. But they have to decide. In other words, the case is over. The petition for certiorari has been filed, and they're going to either deny it or grant it, depending what happens.
Go ahead. What is it? I'm
okay. Well, this case is really hard. It's not hard for me legally, but it's a heartbreaking case in some ways. So prior to this case, almost all of the big affirmative action cases, whether in lower courts or in the Supreme Court, have involved they've all involved white plaintiffs, effectively. And white plaintiffs are suing. Now, when they sue in North Carolina, there's a suit against Chapel Hill right now. They're suing about whites and blacks. When they sue in Texas, which they did in two cases, Fisher 1 and Fisher 2, it's more Hispanic than black, but it's always white and then brown or black. This case is being pursued by a public interest organization called Students for Fair Admissions, which brought many of the other cases as well. But they're bringing it on behalf of Asians, not whites. And they're saying that Harvard is discriminating against Asians, which doesn't violate the Constitution because Harvard is a private university. So the Constitution has nothing to do with this. But there's a federal law, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that says entities that receive federal funds cannot discriminate on the basis of race, a law I applaud and you applaud. We all like that law. It's a good law. If you take federal money, you're not allowed. If you're private but get federal money, you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of race. And so they brought the student of that provision. The Supreme Court has said over and over, whatever the legal rules are under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which normally governs these cases, are the same rules under Title VI. So it's the same legal analysis. And let me just make this very quick work. Harvard does not discriminate against Asian Americans, period, full stop. 100-page district court opinion said that. 100-page Court of Appeals decision said that. Let me tell you what discrimination is before I tell you what Harvard does. Okay. Discrimination is when the University of Texas is all white in 1957, the year before I was born. Discrimination is when the University of Florida and the University of Georgia both were all white by law until the early 1960s when I was alive in this world. That's discrimination. Harvard's class of 2025. I wrote an article about this. I have a piece coming out on Monday on Dorf on Law on this. Harvard's class of 2025 is going to be 25% Asian, 25%, somewhere around 13 to 14% black, 12 and 13% Asian. It's 53% white overall, and then 4% other. Pete, that's not discrimination. It just isn't. What they're arguing is very simple. What they're arguing, the grades and test scores that Asian Americans need to get in to Harvard are higher than the tests and grades of non-Asians. And that's a true statement.
Right.
But you know what's also true? That the very good public school that's about 1.5 miles from my house, no matter how talented the top 10 people are in that class, Harvard will only take 1 or 2.
Right.
Harvard will not take 80% of its class from the Northeast, even if they have the highest GPAs in board schools. Harvard does not require its star athletes to have the board scores and grades of other students. Harvard has geographical complexities to it. It has gender complexities, racial complexities, and what they're trying to fucking do is build a diverse class the best they can. And judges should get the hell out of it.
Well,
they're not discriminating. That whether it's the 14th Amendment as applied to a public school or whether it is Title VI, the whole premise that board scores and grades are the only thing that matters is just false. It's just a false premise. It's not true. First of all, legacies make up some huge percentage of Harvard's class. And those legacies, children of alums and donors, have very different board scores and grades than non-legacies. You know that. We all know that. I mean, that's just, So I hope that case, so what I propose is that case, the Supreme Court should not take that case, let the lower court decision stand, and we'll go on. Now, that's not to say I agree with the law of affirmative action. I don't. It's terrible. But this court isn't going to make it any better, so let's just leave it all alone. Affirmative action, abortion, guns. We could have all three come next June.
We could. We definitely have the first two.
Yeah, we definitely have well, yeah, unless they later decide to dismiss the case. I don't know how many other big cases there are going to be. There'll be some for sure. But they just took a really stupid case out of I forget which state it is, where it's a free speech religion type case where some government entity didn't want to fly a Christian flag, and it's an issue that affects like 10 people, and they're just doing it because they want to make a strong statement about religion. And that's yes, Pete. I cannot say it better than ugh.
Yeah.
I can't. Well, can I say one more thing, please? Can I have about 1 more minute?
Sure.
So I have. I think I've told you before. Two of my closest friends in Atlanta who moved away about 6 years ago. She was the deputy director of the CDC for a while, and she also headed one of the infectious disease centers of the CDC. One of the smartest. She's the woman who talked me out of getting a vasectomy before I met Lynn. That's too much information for your audience. But if she hadn't talked me out of that, Sarah and Katie wouldn't exist in this world.
Right.
And there are about 3 people in the world who could have talked me out of that vasectomy. I hadn't met Lynn yet. And she was one of them because she's one of the most balanced people I know. She's a great gymnast, balance again. She's a great tennis player, balance. I was talking to her the other night, she's now in California, and she said to me, and I'm saying this with full knowledge, this is going to sound egotistical and arrogant, but so be it. She said to me, does it drive you crazy that, because she attended my book talk for Supreme Myths that Lynn threw for me, a very nice event Lynn threw for me in 2012. I mean, I did other official book talks, but they were with my friends and family and stuff. And she was there for that because she's not a lawyer. She doesn't care about law. And she said, everything you said that day, everybody is saying now. Does that drive you crazy? And I said, yes. And because they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it now because they hate the court on partisan political grounds. That's not what I said that day. What I said that day was this has been a broken institution since 1788.
Right.
And I got to say, Pete, I want, because you're the only person I would say this to this way, because you and I, because you gave me, I wouldn't be doing this today if it wasn't for you 10 years ago. I don't know how to deal with the idea that people are espousing what I said 10 years ago and pretending it's their ideas. Like, I just don't know what to do about it. Like, it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you to deal with that. I guess it's just.
Yeah. I mean, it's my job. So it'd be like you come. I mean, it's not that different than you coming up with an amazing, back in the day, stand-up routine. Right. This probably does happen to you. And
no, I understand. I understand that frustration. Who is anybody particular? Is there a particular?
It's just I get tweets. I get people tweeting at me all the time. Did you see this tweet? Which is from somebody I've never heard of. Telling how the court's not a court.
Right. And it's not like you've been hiding.
So, yeah. Well, thanks to you. I would have been hiding if it wasn't. Well,
you wrote, you wrote 2 books about it. You give me too much credit. So.
Oh, that first book doesn't get written if it's not for you. I've said it to you many times.
Right?
It's true. Yeah.
Huh. Wow. That is something. That is my legacy then.
Yes. A different book may have been written or may have been written later, but it definitely would not have been written then without you prodding me. It all comes back to you and Dahlia.
Wow.
It really does.
That's really unbelievably flattering to me and makes me feel really good to know that I've done more than teach people to be against single-use plastic.
I mean, for people who don't know that very fast story, you had Dahlia Lithwick, who's one of the great Supreme Court commentators in the country, writes for Slate, and myself on your show to talk about the Affordable Care Act, actually to talk about the merits of the case. But I said during that conversation that Justice Kagan absolutely has to recuse herself from this case. It pains me to say it. I don't want to say it because we didn't know what, we thought that would mean the death knell of Obamacare, but she had to recuse herself.
Right.
We hung up the phone. Dahlia writes me an email. I don't agree with you about that, she said, but write it up for Slate and we'll see what happens. I wrote it up for Slate. It was the first time I had done something like that. It kind of went viral. It led to op-eds in the LA Times and all kinds of other places. It led to a law review thing in the University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah. That's what started. And then I had to go on Twitter, which you made my daughter create a web.
I'm responsible for that.
That Dahlia, and the thing about that's amazing is Dahlia could not have disagreed with me more on the merits.
Right.
Yet I made enough sense. That she thought that view should be expressed. Ian Millhauser, who's a very famous liberal Twitter guy, not a law professor, but he writes for Vox now. He wrote a response to me that was very angry in Slate. I wrote a reply to that. And then I ended up, Pete, having that debate, whether Justice Kagan should recuse herself, in the University of Pennsylvania Law Review, very elite law review, with Sherilyn Ifill, the general counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and cousin of the late Gwen Ifill, who was on the PBS. Yeah, Pennsylvania invited us to do that. None of that happens without you and Dahlia, and you specifically. And that started a whole new career.
Oh, wow. That is something. I'm going to sell this. I'm going to send this audio, to Dahlia, make sure she's aware of all this. Now, I know you didn't want to talk about this, but I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. Your new book, Dr. Doom's Supreme Gloom, do you have a date, a publication date for Dr. Doom's Supreme Gloom?
You know who started this? Tina Winston. I started
it.
No, you did not. No, Tina did.
She did? What did she do?
Yes. I'm pretty sure Tina started it. No, you carried the torch, but this is Tina.
That's
this
funny.
is more Tina than you.
I don't want credit for it, but I do think it's hilarious. All right.
I'm not writing that book, but I am I am seriously thinking about Supremeness too. So we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Great. All right. Thank you very much. Amazing as always. Really appreciate all your insights, sir. And the people love you. They just love you.
Do not forget that Alito is an asshole.
I don't know how we could. I mean, have you seen his face? Eric Segall, everybody. Eric Segall. Yeah. Never forget. Alito is an asshole. Love it. Love it. So real, so fresh. And of course, that's his interpretation of things, always his opinion. You can get lots of other constitutional lawyers and scholars who might disagree, but we got him on call, and he's one of my best friends. Always love our conversations, and so do you. Thank you very much for your feedback on this one on Twitter as well, at eSpinSegall, and listen to his podcast, Supreme Myths, and read him wherever he is writing. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. If you haven't subscribed to the show, do to it now. It's as little as $5, and you get to join our community, and it's a community of growing, amazing, awesome people who are learning together how to deal in this new world that we're living in. So join us in it. Go to standupwithpete.com, standupwithpete.com, or just sign up at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. All right. Speaking of one of those great members of our community, he is singer-songwriter, Grammy Award-winning John Carroll, singing us out with our very own song, Stand Up. You can go buy this, too, at johncarroll.org. Take us away, sir.
Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 come on. Stand up.
Against